Hello and welcome. Xi Jinping has become the most powerful leader in China in decades after being given a third term as leader of the Communist Party. In staying on, he has brushed aside the convention that the party's general secretary should retire after 2 5-year terms. Unless he's forcibly removed from power, Mr. Xi should now be able to personally choose for how long he will govern. His third term was announced at a ceremony in Beijing, from where our China correspondent Stephen McDonnell reports.
Xi Jinping led out China's new leadership team, in order of rank, with him at the top. It confirmed one of the worst-kept secrets in the world, that he'd remain in power into a third term, and potentially for as long as he likes, barring some unknown upheaval in the future.
China is embarking on a long journey filled with glory and dreams, and the bugle has been sounded.
Again, there were no women on the 7-person Politburo Standing Committee, a group stacked with Xi loyalists. The appointment of Li Qiang as Premier will concern some. He oversaw the disastrous months-long Shanghai lockdown with significant food shortages. Now Mr. Li is in charge of managing the Chinese economy.
I think the appointment of Li Qiang as the Premier shows that Xi Jinping is not principally interested in the economy. He's never really been interested in the economy except as a political tool.
China's new leadership faces exploding youth unemployment and a massive property crisis. They also have to generate economic activity while implementing strict zero-COVID lockdowns. Xi Jinping and his team have pledged to tackle these problems with ideological unity and nationalist zeal. Well, many will wonder if that's going to be enough. Crucially, there are no identifiable successors to Mr. Xi in this group. Yet another indication he could remain in power for a long time. Stephen McDonnell, BBC News, Beijing.
Well, President Putin of Russia has expressed enthusiastic praise for Xi Jinping. Mr. Putin said the development confirmed Mr. Xi's high political authority. North Korea's communist leader Kim Jong-un was also quick to send his warmest congratulations. Well, let's get more on this, and joining us live is Dr. Neil Munro, who is a senior lecturer in Chinese politics at the University of Glasgow. Welcome to you. Thanks very much for being with us. So this was widely expected, Xi Jinping securing a third term, enabling him to stay in power possibly as long as he likes. Why does he want to? What does he want to do with this authority, with this power?
Well, we've got some clues from the political report that was issued at the start of the Congress. So most of the report is concerned with making the system, the political system and the party system more streamlined, more integrated, and easier for him to use to govern. There's also quite a lot in there about green issues. He's still quite committed to that. He still has a strong ambition to arrange reunification with Taiwan, and the economy, as your reporter mentioned, is not really the focus of the report.
Speaking earlier, he said that China needs the world and the world needs China. So what does this mean for the country and for its international place in the world?
Well, I think we can expect more of what we've seen over the last 10 years. Recall that Xi Jinping's signature initiative in the world economy was the Belt and Road initiative, and that involved large-scale investment in developing countries and countries around China. So as the economy starts to run into difficulties, we can expect to see less of that, but still the outward orientation, the orientation towards China being more important as an investor and as a trading partner, we can expect that to continue. The difficulties will be with the Ukraine crisis causing problems with China's integration, in Russia being a big sort of player and energy being such a big issue. So we can expect from that angle China to be pushing more the idea of de-dollarization, moving away from the dollar as the dominant currency, but there's such a long way to go on that this is still very early days.
And I want to ask you about the position of women in China's politics, because there are no women appointed to the top teams, and this isn't that unusual, but what role do women play politically, and what does this say about what say they have?
Well, there seems to be a definite glass ceiling. We don't know exactly where it is. Women do play a role in the Communist Party. The Communist Party, when it came to power in 1949, saw itself as a liberator of women and did a lot to change the traditional place of women in Chinese society, making it more equal and more involving women in the workplace and so on. However, after that initial sort of push, probably from the late 60s onward, or it hasn't been such a big priority. And in some ways, you could say that women over the last 20, 30 years have actually gone backward in terms of their political position.
Okay, Dr. Neil Munro, thanks very much for joining us from the University of Glasgow there.
Thank you.
Now, there have been some extraordinary scenes at China's ruling Communist Party Congress, with the former Chinese leader Hu Jintao being led out of the closing ceremony in Beijing. As you can see here, Mr. Hu was sitting beside President Xi Jinping in the Great Hall of the People when he was approached by officials who took him by the arm and led him away. It's not clear what was behind the move during what's usually a highly choreographed event. Our correspondent Steve McDonnell has more from Beijing.
Incredible scenes there at the Great Hall of the People this morning, and it's left a lot of people scratching their heads wondering what's going on. I think to unpack this, it's probably best to take it chronologically. So the morning session initially was behind closed doors. Then the second part of the last day at the Congress, some journalists were allowed into the Great Hall of the People. Hu Jintao was sitting in the front row on stage, and then in front of the cameras, several officials came along and said to him, well, you could see the ushering, you should go. He looks like he doesn't want to leave. But then he says something to Xi Jinping, who nods. He tapped his protege Li Keqiang on the shoulder and is helped off the stage. Now, there are only two possibilities, really. One is that this is sort of Chinese power politics on display with, Xi Jinping out with the old, in with him, there's something like that. And that was people's initial, feeling, the initial thought of what was going on. Really, though, I think what's much more likely is that it's something to do with his health. Because when you look at the footage a little bit earlier, when he's still sitting down, to his left on stage, other senior figures in the party, you can see they're turning to him. They look a bit worried about him. And then when he stands up, and the fact that he says something to Xi Jinping who nods, I think what's most likely is that he has some sort of a serious health problem, and that's why China's former leader wasn't able to sit through the final session there at the Communist Party Congress.
Welcome to Your Questions Answered. You have been sending in plenty of questions on the cost of living and the rise in inflation, and it is clear that many of you want to know more about the support that is available to you and how you can cope with the squeeze in living standards. So we'll try to answer as many of your questions as we can. And to answer those questions, I'm joined by the BBC's cost of living correspondent, Kevin Peachy, and also Judith Wood-Archer from the Citizens Advice Bureau in Gateshead. Welcome to you both. Well, let's just take a look at what are some of the most searched for answers online to the big economic questions at the moment. First of all, let's take a look at some of the most searched for queries, perhaps unsurprisingly, many about the energy price cap. People are searching on when the rebate payments are due. They want to know how the energy price cap works, and perhaps after some scary newspaper headlines, how high energy prices could go. Well, let's answer some of those questions first of all. Judith, first of all, on the energy rebates, what is the answer to that question about when the rebate payments are due?
So rebate payments, people should have received those already in October, and the next set of rebate payments are due in November. They're coming, it's a £400 rebate, and they're coming in equal payments through your bill. If you're a direct debit customer, it should come through your bill. Prepayment customers should be getting it added to their prepayment card or fob, whatever they use normally.
How does the energy price cap work? Because the government policy has changed in terms of how long it goes on for. So bring us up to date.
Yeah, so the energy price cap is, it's really important to understand that this talk of £2,500 or £4,000 come April is an average bill. The energy price cap itself is applied to a unit cost that you use as your electricity or your gas amount of money. So the price cap caps that unit cost, not the actual amount of your bill. So
on that then, I mean, how high could energy bills go? That's what people are worrying about.
The energy bill themselves could go as high as they can, depending on how much energy you use. So the more energy you use, the higher your bill will go. So the average household bill will be around £2,500, but if you take measures to use less energy as best you can without affecting your health or your well-being, then you can bring it a lot lower than that.
A lot of questions around mortgages. Should I get a new mortgage now is a popular question. What's the answer?
Getting a new mortgage is outside of my experience and area of expertise. I don't know if Kevin can sort of talk to that a bit further, but my advice is to go and seek some advice from a professional.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I'm not going to tell you when to get a mortgage, clearly, but what we have seen is the statement by Jeremy Hunt, the new Chancellor, just earlier this week, was designed to settle the markets, designed to settle that cost of government borrowing, and that feeds through to the cost of our fixed mortgages. And what we've seen is that cost really shot. It's been going up all year, but then shot up after the mini budget, and has levelled off a bit. We haven't seen it come down yet because it's not an immediate effect. So we would all love to know the future, of course, but I think it's safe to say there is an expectation that at least the rise in those fixed mortgage costs is going to at least level off and possibly come down again. Remember, if you're on a variable rate or a tracker deal, then that will reflect what the Bank of England does, and it just in a few days' time we'll hear the latest from the Bank of England, which is expecting to put up the benchmark rate, the bank rate, even further. So that will affect just over 1 million or so mortgage holders.
Why are interest rates rising?
Well, it is true that this is a global issue. So across the world, there are rates have been rising, and that's a lot to do with inflation, which we've seen today, 10.1% in the UK, expected to peak at 11%. Clearly the best and the biggest part of the Bank of England's armoury to try and bring inflation, the rising cost of living, down to its target of 2% is to raise interest rates, something that's been seen across the world, and clearly that has an impact on all of our personal finances.
When and will interest rates fall?
Well, they're expected to peak at 11%, so we haven't quite hit the top yet. But the expectation is that then they fall away. But one really important point is that's inflation.
I was going to say, my mind is going into overdrive. Interest rates 11%.
Exactly,
I haven't heard that before.
So that's inflation. Okay. That's prices going up, and clearly it's when interest rates are trying to counter that, and that's interest rates have been rising, and we don't know, but we think it's going to be longer than previously anticipated that those rates will be high.
So in terms of top interest rates, I mean, you spooked us all by saying 11%.
Yes,
not going to go that high.
Yes. So no, we're talking 11% in terms of the rate of price rises, and obviously we're seeing rates at a higher level than we've seen for some time.
Yeah. Okay, so those are the kind of most searched for questions. Let's get some specific ones from viewers. Bassam Al-Mouri asks, when inflation settles and comes down, would current prices stick or come down? In other words, are these new higher prices permanent? That's a really good question, isn't it?
It's a really good question and a really, really important question, because we hear about inflation, the rising cost of living, and we hear that it may well settle down. But remember, those price rises that you're feeling now are baked in, if you like. They're baked into the figures. So if inflation, say, comes down to 5% to 2%, it doesn't mean that prices are falling. It means that the rate of increase is slowing. So we will still feel those higher prices, but the rate of increase will be slowing. So the prices you see in the shops won't necessarily be falling, it's just the rise will slow.
Okay. Question for you here, Judith, from Sarah in Norwich. How long will it take for Jeremy Hunt's action to bring down... Actually, I can't ask you this because it's about mortgage rates and you've already said that's not your specialist subject. So I'm going to ask you, Kevin. We'll come to you for one in a minute. A question from Sarah. How long will it take for Jeremy Hunt's action to bring down mortgage rates? She says her mortgage is about to go up by 60%.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, there's not an immediate effect on that, and we're seeing rates at, well, a typical 2-year fixed rate mortgage at 6.5%. That's something we haven't seen for 14 years. It won't be immediate, the fall. We'll have to wait and see if and when it does come. But as I say before, I think the expectation is that the rises that we've seen will slow, if not stop.
Same question from two people here, John and Raymond. As a pensioner, am I going to get any help with the cost of living increase other than the energy price cap?
There is some further money that's coming to pensioners, depending on whether you're on the here we are, found it, sorry, the winter fuel payment. So if you're on the winter fuel payments, then you can get an extra £300 for your household, which would be paid with your normal payment from November 2022, and that's in addition to any cost of living money. But for pensioners, I would say get a benefit check and make sure that you're on the right benefits, that you're getting everything you're entitled to, which then may passport you into these sorts of cost of living payments in the future.
How do you get a benefit check?
Go and get advice from a professional. If you're able to access things online, then on Citizens Advice website we have a number of benefit checks that you can use yourself, or access your local service, either a Citizens Advice or another advice agency. Some councils do their own advice services.
Is it quite common that people are entitled to benefits that they don't even realise?
Absolutely it is. I was just looking at a case study yesterday, and somebody was struggling with paying their bills. We did a benefit check, and they've got entitlement to personal independence payment, and so we're helping them to apply for that now.
And I think there's an estimated 850,000 people who are entitled to pension credit. Remember, that's a top-up to your state pension, right. And a gateway to some of those other payments that we mentioned. That's still going unclaimed. So 850,000 people is a lot of people.
And what's it worth? And what do they need? What's the sort of broad brush for how someone knows whether they're eligible or not?
So this is low-income pensioners, a bit of a top-up to your state pension, it's really important, I guess, here for the work of family and friends, because they're the ones who are probably going to say, oh, hang on a minute, maybe you can claim this benefit, because let's face it, it is a confusing picture, and that's why people like Judith spend a lot of time with people going, line by line through their finances, through their budgets, to try and work out what they're entitled to.
So if someone's watching at home and they think it might apply to one of their loved ones, they should be kind of asking those questions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really complex system, and we're trained to help with that. So absolutely.
And we should also mention, before moving on to the next question as well, we now know that the pension is going to go up in line with the rate of inflation. That's been confirmed today. It was confirmed before. It was taken away. It's back again now. So that at least
I can tell you actually in pounds and pence what that means. So if you receive the new state pension, so that's people who've retired since April 2016, your weekly payment's going to go to just above £200. If you're on the old state pension, your weekly payment going up to about £156. So that's what you're going to get, and as I say, there's a bit of clarity after a lot of speculation in the last few days.
Thank you for those questions, John and Raymond. I hope lots of helpful advice there arising from those. Jack Lord says the cost of living seems to be higher in my area than in others. Is the rise in prices uniform across the country? interesting? What's the sense on that one?
No, it's not uniform across the country. Certainly with energy providers, depending on where you live, you can be charged different rates. Obviously everybody's at the price cap now, but it does vary.
Different rates for energy?
Yeah, it has done until the price cap came in, yeah, absolutely.
Why?
I think it's to do with the way that the energy comes to you as a final end consumer. Prices also are different within shops. You can see it if you go to there's particular brands where you might go to a shop that's in one area of your town, you go to the same brand in a different area of your town, they might be charging different prices.
Again, why?
Because they can, Joanna.
They can. Yeah.
You know,
I mean, we all see it, but
yeah,
it is
absolutely.
It's always worth asking why is that happening?
It's particularly in rural areas where you're stuck with that one particular shop. You've got no other way of getting anywhere else. You might be a pensioner on a low income. You've got no other way of shopping anywhere else. Then that's what you're stuck with. You can't go to the discounters and what have you because you don't have a vehicle to take you there. You can't necessarily afford the delivery charges. But they do charge different prices in different shops.
And it's not just the geography that affects it as well, it's your personal circumstances. So if you're on a low income, then actually it's likely, given that it's the essentials at the moment that are really driving the rising cost of living, food, fuel, energy, that actually your personal inflation rate is likely to be higher if you are on a lower income. And actually we've got a calculator on the BBC website where we can put in some of your details and see, give some kind of estimate as to where your personal inflation rate is.
And also there's tailored guidance for people as well in terms of what they can look out for to help their own situation on the website if they put in their
absolutely
details.
A whole host of stuff on there today.
Adrian York, my PIP benefit has been cut by nearly £1,300. I've cut back on everything I can. How am I supposed to get by?
The first thing I say to Adrian is get some advice. It's never too late to, it obviously depends on when the decision was made to cut his personal independence payment benefit, but I would say get some advice, find out if it can be challenged. The decisions by the DWP can always be challenged. He potentially has up to 13 months in which to do that. And for ourselves in Citizens Advice Gateshead, we have a running rate ourselves of 80% success of these benefits that have been turned down or altered. When we come along and we help people to challenge those decisions, our success rate is 80% of those are overturned and people get their benefits put back in place. So I strongly suggest that he gets advice.
So I'm going to ask the why question again. Why is it that people have to go through that process and end up with what they have as a final outcome? Because if they didn't come to you, they wouldn't get that.
No, they wouldn't. And it's about people not understanding how to fill in their form in the first place, perhaps, so anybody who's thinking about applying now, get help in applying in the first place so that you get the detail that's needed on the form correct. And then making sure that you've got gathering the right sort of medical evidence, because in order to consider your disability, they need to understand your disability, and the best way of doing that is by presenting some medical evidence from a medical professional.
So these forms are complex, aren't they?
Absolutely.
A lot of the time.
Yeah,
so it's always good to get some
40-odd pages
guidance.
long, a PIP form.
How many?
40-odd.
Wow.
Yeah.
Guidance is good.
Yeah.
Support is good. Always ask questions and get some help. Let's talk about ISAs. Tony Fenlon wants to know about savings. Will there be better saving rates available in the next few months?
Again, difficult to tell what the future will hold, but I guess there's a bit of good news here, really, because savers for a decade have been living, as everybody has, with a period of very low interest rates, very little return on their savings. But there's a bit more competition about now. Those rates have risen. Now, that's the good news. There's the idea that you can shop around a bit more now for a decent savings rate, or a better savings rate, much better than if you just left it in an account, and there are lots of them which pay very little or no interest. That said, back to inflation, rising cost of living, that eats away at any savings that you have. The buying power of those savings is obviously lower because prices are rising. So I've given you a bit of good news, but maybe a little bit of a cloud there too.
Yeah, and the other part of that picture is people are spending their savings often on the basics because they're having to find the extra money in any way that they can. Have you got any figures on what's happening with savings on that front?
No, to be honest, but of course, we simplify this sometimes, don't we, to savers and borrowers, but of course most people are savers and borrowers, so while they might be getting a little more return on their savings, they're also facing higher mortgage costs or higher costs on their personal loans. So we all ourselves have quite complex financial situations, as has the nation as a whole.
Judy asks, do we know why the government scaled back its help with energy bills, or what will happen after next April? What will happen after next April? We know there's going to be a review.
Yeah, we know there's going to be a review. It's looking like it's going to be a means-tested review. So for people on low incomes, potentially will get the help that's needed, rather this blanket approach that's happening at the moment, where everybody gets the same amount of money on the discount of their energy bills. So that's as much as I know. I don't know if Kevin's got more to add to that.
Well, what we do know is some forecasts about how high those typical energy bills go, and as Julia said, really important to stress, this is a typical bill for a typical usage, not what you can pay more than that. Or less, exactly. So Cornwall Insight, the consultant's saying that in April could be an annual bill could be £4,350 odd pounds. Next winter, £3,700 a year. Now, forecasts are obviously dependent so much on events, and as we've seen for the last year, there can be huge swings in what happens to your energy bills. When we compare our energy bills now to where they were a year ago, well, it's about £1,200 for that typical bill a year ago.
We had no idea it was going to be like this.
Exactly, and then global events obviously are a big factor in this as well.
John Roberts, millions of people rely on heating oil to heat their homes. Why isn't the government doing more to help them?
They're getting some help. Why the government? I can't answer the why. I can give you the what if I can find my notes, but
£100.
£100, thank you. Yeah, so the people who are not with the traditional gas and electric are getting £100 in terms of rebate. Why it's less? I guess that's policy that they've made a decision about.
Right. What's happening with heating oil costs?
Really, they are going up. They fluctuates quite a lot, but going up, and that hence the £100 support. But a really important issue in Northern Ireland, whereas about 68% of the population are on heating oil, often in rural areas. So it's a really key issue there, and it's been watched very closely, because one would imagine that again is part of this Treasury review as to what's going to happen in April.
Yeah.
Clive Brown, am I correct in assuming that if the Chancellor freezes the personal allowance for income tax, then the 10% increase will only be 8% in real terms?
Right, I'm going to do the calculator in my head. Might take a while. Look, what we can say is that obviously you have some toing and froing on income tax rates and whether it's going to be cut or not. Now we're back to it's not going to be cut. But what we do know is that the thresholds at which you pay the different rates of income tax have been frozen, and so it's what it's in the economy is called fiscal drag, which actually means as you get a pay rise, you move into a higher income tax threshold. It could be clearly that you could be paying more in income tax, even if effectively you've done nothing differently, really. So that's why that question's being answered. Take us a little bit longer to do the sums on that one.
Thank you, Kevin and Judith. Thank you. I mean, what's absolutely clear is so many of you have so many questions, and lots of difficult choices are being made. And what we're hearing there is a lot of advice out there if you need it. So you can go on the BBC News website. There's all sorts of signposting for advice, and there are also some tools that mean that you can put in your personal details and work out what your personal situation is and where there might be some help available that you perhaps didn't know about. Thank you for your questions. We're going to stay here in Sunderland throughout the rest of the afternoon looking at the cost of living and its impact.
Let's cross to the United States now, because we've got breaking news regarding the US political strategist Steve Bannon. He's been sentenced following his conviction on 2 counts of contempt of Congress. A former advisor to President Trump, he was convicted for defying a subpoena from lawmakers investigating the Capitol riots on January 6th last year. Now, he worked as part of Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, then served as his chief White House strategist during 2017. So let's cross over to Washington. My colleague Gary O'Donoghue joins us live. So with news just in, Gary, that we've got this sentence, Steve Bannon sentenced to 4 months in prison.
Yeah, 2 counts he was convicted on. He's getting 2 sentences of 4 months to run concurrently and a fine of $6,500. Now, the prosecutors were looking for a jail term of 6 months and a much more substantial fine of $200,000. So they've got something towards what they wanted in terms of a prison time, but nothing like the fine. Bannon is expected to appeal these convictions, and he won't go to jail until those appeals have run their course if he's unsuccessful. But he really does represent the most high profile, I think, of Donald Trump's supporters to get a sort of prison sentence in connection with the events of January the 6th, even if it is really indirectly in connection for defying Congress.
And understandably, Gary, a huge amount of interest in this.
Yeah, I mean, he's a very controversial figure. He's a very powerful and influential person on the right. He still has a lot of followers in terms of his broadcast media, and he, despite having left the White House pretty early on in Donald Trump's presidency, he only really lasted inside the White House for about 8 months or so. He continued after some reconciliation to be a powerful influence on Donald Trump, and the January the 6th committee say that he was part of a group of senior strategists, including people like Rudy Giuliani, Donald Trump's personal lawyer, former mayor of New York, who met at the Willard Hotel here in Washington the night before the attacks on the Capitol, and Bannon told his audience that day that all hell was going to break loose.
And in terms of reaction, we know, Gary, he was outside of court, he was rather vocal when it came to all of this.
Yeah, I mean, he's been pretty robust throughout this whole event. He's described the Biden administration as illegitimate. He's talked about his campaigns, particularly against the Chinese state and things like that. And
Gary, as we talk about what he's saying, we're just going to dip in and listen into what he's saying live now.
I testified before the Mueller Commission for more hours. I testified in front of Chair Schiff and the House Intelligence Committee more than any other person in the Trump administration. I testified in front of the Senate Intelligence, I think more than any, all about the issues related to Russiagate, to all of that, okay? The same process every time. I had lawyers that were engaged, they worked through the issues of privilege, and at that time I went and testified. And this thing about I'm above the law is an absolute and total lie. Now, more importantly, the judge, today was my judgment day by the judge, and he stated for the appeal. We'll have a very vigorous appeals process. I've got a great legal team, and there'll be multiple areas of appeal. But, as that sign says right there, can we have the vote sign? On November 8th, on November 8th, there's going to have judgment on the illegitimate Biden regime, and quite frankly, that Nancy Pelosi and the entire committee. And we know which way that's going. Either they've already been turfed out, like Liz Cheney, right, or have quit, like Kinzinger and other the Democrats, or they're about to be beaten like Luria and others, or they will lose their power and become a minority, and Nancy Pelosi and Chairman Thompson, all of it. This is democracy. This is democracy. The American people are weighing and measuring what went on with the Justice Department and how they comported themselves. They're weighing and measuring that right now, and they will vote on November 8th.
Mr. Bannon, your supporters noticed your silence during this case. They noticed your silence at trial and at sentencing. Anything you want to say to them?
Can I go ahead and finish? Can I? Thanks. On November 8th, the American people will raise judgment, and we will groom. The Biden administration ends on the evening of the 8th of November. And some other thing is that the Department of Justice, Merrick Garland, will end up being the first Attorney General that's brought up on charges of impeachment, and he'll be removed from office. Thank you very much.
So Steve Bannon there referring to November the 8th, of course, November the 8th being the midterms. And Gary O'Donoghue is still monitoring this for us from Washington. And Gary, he's being as provocative as usual, following that sentencing of 4 months in prison that we've just had within the past few moments.
Yeah, I think there may be some wishful thinking there. I'd be surprised if Steve Bannon's treatment by the Justice Department is uppermost in voters' minds come November the 8th. I think things like the economy, things other cost of living crisis, they may be more on voters' minds than how the Department of Justice treated Steve Bannon per se. But he clearly wants to turn this into a sort of political discussion rather than a discussion about defying Congress. But there you heard him confirming, of course, that he does plan to appeal the conviction itself, and that could take some time. So if he's unsuccessful, he will get this 4-month jail term, but that may not take place for a while the legal process plays out.
Yes, of course, and it's good that you point out that, yes, but voters may be not as interested in Steve Bannon when it comes to November the 8th, but this is such a hugely controversial figure, and there was so much concern after what we saw with the Capitol Hill riots.
Yeah, and we know now, we're waiting actually now for the subpoena that the January the 6th committee has decided to issue for Donald Trump to appear before them and to supply documents. They announced that at the end of last week. We're expecting that any moment. That will have a time scale on it for Donald Trump to do those things, appear and provide documents. The clock is ticking for that committee. The one thing that Steve Bannon is right about is that the midterms changes the dynamic of the January the 6th committee, because if the Democrats lose their slim majority in the House of Representatives, then they lose control over that select committee and whether or not it can continue its work. And so come the new year and the new Congress, if the Republicans in charge, they're going to scrap that select committee. So the pressure is on to get their work finished, get their report written, get any recommendations they see fit to send to the Department of Justice in terms of criminal charges. And I think all that makes it pretty unlikely that Donald Trump will appear before that committee, given that in the past, the evidence is that he doesn't, despite what he says, he doesn't tend to show up to give evidence to these sorts of investigations. He didn't sit for the Mueller inquiry, for example.
Yeah, good point. OK, well, Gary, as always, many thanks for the time being with that reaction there to Steve Bannon being sentenced to 4 months in prison for contempt of Congress. Lots more.
The leader of China, Xi Jinping, is set to be given a historic third term in power this weekend, and the effort to boost his image and popularity is in full swing across the country. State media has headline stories about how poorer towns have been transformed after visits from the president. Our correspondent Celia Hatton reports on how he rose to power.
When he strode onto this stage 10 years ago, signaling he'd become China's new leader, he was a relative unknown. He was supposed to rule alongside these 6 other officials. But now it's clear that he's reshaped the Communist Party, the military, and the government so that he's at the top of it all. Some call him the chairman of everything. So how did he do it? How did he become so powerful? He started out with a bold vision, the China Dream. It unleashed big projects to build things like high-speed rail networks and new global trading routes that aimed to revitalize the whole country. And through viral incidents like this, a visit to a Beijing steamed bun shop, He cultivated a different image for himself, making sure everyone in China knew his story and saw him as the top leader. He reorganized the military, too. By ousting hundreds of generals and replacing them with his allies, he's firmly in control. And let's not forget the ongoing anti-corruption crackdown. This man, Zhou Yongkang, is the former top security chief now in prison for amassing $14 billion in ill-gotten gains. More than 1 million party officials have been punished under Xi, silencing all rivals. The campaign's popular with the public, but it's also bred fear. Xi is at the top of his game, but he faces serious challenges. China's economy is suffering under tight COVID restrictions, and he's made quite a few enemies behind the scenes. China watchers will be looking to see if he begins to delegate any responsibilities, sharing the power and also the blame. Celia Hatton, BBC News.
Live to Beijing now, Dr. Henry Wang is the president of the think tank Centre for China and Globalisation. Thank you for joining us, sir. My colleague Celia there highlighted some of the issues that might be playing on President Xi Jinping's mind there. And I understand that the Congress rarely reveals an agenda for what might be discussed. But how do you understand the issues at play? What might they be talking about?
Yes, thank you. And what I think that upcoming 20th Party Congress is very significant. Basically, CPC holds this every 5 years. And then for this 5 years, a big Congress, about 2,000, almost 300 delegates will come, and we will elect a central committee, and then they will elect Politburo members, and then they will elect a standing committee. So I understand this conference, actually, 20th Party Congress, is a summary of what has been achieved in the last 5 years, and what will be achieved again for the next 5 years, the goal that they're going to set for this new conference. So basically, we're going to expect more, new cohort of leaders, of governors, party secretary, ministers coming up. We're going to have a new 5-year plan. Basically, which China has secured the first centennial plan, which is the party 100-year anniversary that they have elevated the hundreds of millions of property, and now they're going to have the second centennial plan, which is going to build China into a modernized society by 2049. Okay,
you sound very optimistic, sir. And one other aspect of this Congress that is expected is that Xi Jinping will get an unprecedented third term in office. That is the sense that we are getting. And there are concerns linked to that this will only tighten his grip and control over China, and a sense that he seems to have more control over the country than his predecessors. Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think there's, if President Xi is capable and very competent, there's no reason why he cannot continue. I mean, we see Angela Merkel has served 16 years as the Chancellor of Germany. So what has been President Xi achieved in the last decade, basically since he took the leadership? We see China GDP doubled. We see China actually, lifted over 120 million people out of poverty in the past decade. And we see China become the largest trading nation in the world. And so China actually, we added the 50 Fortune 500 company to the Fortune 500 country, list. So there's a lot of, past performance that paved the way for some new leadership. So I think that people are expecting continuity. We don't want to, ups and downs and back and forth and all those politics we see in some other countries. So I think this is good for China. You have a 5-year plan, after another 5-year plan. We have an objective continue to pass on. Yeah. Okay, you talk about him as a stabilizing force, but there have been concerns from China watchers, at least, that this hasn't always been the case. A good example of this are some of the COVID lockdowns that some people thought as possibly unnecessary, possibly too harsh, and possibly without sufficient resources. So that, of course, linked to the aspect of poverty that some people haven't necessarily benefited as much as others. I think so. Yeah, you raised the question, but that's really, I think, have to give a special consideration of China, because you have 1.4 billion people, I mean, it's not evenly developed. You know, many areas still not very, very poor in terms of medical handling. So we cannot allow that this 1% death or something happened in like within other countries, because that would be a huge number for China. But I think China is really getting that under control. We have only a few thousand casualties in terms of the death from COVID, and then we have actually developed a methodology of tracing, testing, and contain the virus. So I'm confident. I mean, as this virus comes down, that Hong Kong is opened already, and Beijing is having its international marathon resumed on November 6th.
Okay.
We may see some new things coming up.
There is much more I'd like to talk to you about, sir, but we will have to leave it there. Thank you for your time here on BBC World News.
Thank you.
Send me gift. Send me gift. Send me yes. Send me yes. For life. For life. For life.
There's a new trend on TikTok. Children in camps in Syria begging for hours on end. They're asking for TikTok gifts that can be withdrawn as real money. But that money isn't all going to them. We've been following more than 300 accounts going live on TikTok, trying to work out where that money's going.
الأسد $500 هن بياخذوا النسبة 70%.
How people living in desperate circumstances suddenly have the phones, internet, and TikTok accounts to go live.
TikTok is creating and enabling an ecosystem that runs on the exploitation of people's suffering.
And why so many of the donors come from the UK.
Over £1,000 would have been put in there, and that to them would have been a lot of money.
We've uncovered a network of companies around the world, including agencies contracted by TikTok in China, all making money off these displaced families. Earlier this year, TikTok users in the UK began to notice something different on the app. Suddenly, their feeds were full of live videos of Syrian families living in tents, asking for help. This is the account I've been using to follow some of these families in Syria, and you can see here all of these accounts are live right now. And actually, if you watch some of the videos, you can see there's a pattern. The children seem to be saying the same kind of things. They're asking for likes and gifts. And if you listen closely, sometimes you can hear there's a voice off camera actually telling them what to say.
Please like. Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Over the past 5 months, we've been following hundreds of TikTok accounts posting the same type of videos to find out who's behind this trend.
A lot of them are displaced from their homes because they're destroyed because of the war of what's in the last 10 years in Syria.
Mohammed Abdullah, a local journalist, visited a camp near Idlib where families are going live on TikTok. There are hundreds of camps in this part of Syria. More than 2 million people live in them, forcibly displaced in Syria's long-running civil war. They have limited options to earn a living, and for some, it's their only source of income. Mona's husband was killed in an airstrike. She now lives with her 6 daughters, and she's saving up to pay for medical treatment for her daughter Sharifa, who's blind.
بحكي عن قصتي عن العيشة شلون عايشين بالمخيمات وشلون تشردنا وعن وضع هاي البنت من شان العالم تدعمنا ويساعدوني.
To go live on TikTok, you need at least 1,000 followers. Then, when you're live, users can send digital gifts to reward creators for content they like. These gifts are bought with real money, ranging from roses, which cost a few cents, to lions and universes, which cost around $500 each. The gifts are converted to a virtual currency that you can withdraw as cash. But not all that cash is going to the families in need. Hamid also lives in the camp and is known as a TikTok middleman. He sold his livestock to buy a phone and now works with 12 different families, setting up their accounts, filming and withdrawing their cash.
التيك توك احنا ندخل عن طريق اللايف البث المباشر. تجينا هدايا مثلا وردات، كل 100 وردة عليها $1. نضل بجمع فيهم رصيد حتى يصيروا $100.
Hamid told us he buys British SIM cards to get British viewers because he says they're the most generous gifters. TikTok's algorithm suggests content based on where your SIM card comes from. We found kiosks selling international SIM cards near the camp. That explains why TikTok users in the UK had been seeing these videos, like Keith, who donated £300 in TikTok gifts to a family in Syria.
There must have been about 50,000 people that came on that live. Even though the man had his legs blown off and he had his arm blown off, he was the most positive guy you could ever meet or speak to. I probably think over £1,000 would have been put in there, and that to them would have been a lot of money.
We get the money!
So how much of that do the families get? Hamid says most of the gift's value is taken by TikTok before it even reaches his account.
هدية إذا جت مثلا إذا خلينا نقول يجينا أسد، الأسد رصيده $500. ما بيوصل لهون للدانا يعني إلا شغلة $155.
He also said middlemen are getting help from agencies in China.
أي مشكلة تصير علينا كذا مثلا حظر أو بلوك مشان إذا ما علي حق تفكه. نعطيهم اسم الصفحة وصورة الصفحة، تدخل عندي الصفحة نظامية بيضغطوا لي 1000 متابع.
That's because TikTok says you need 1,000 followers in order to go live. Live agencies are a growing part of TikTok's business strategy. They're contracted by TikTok to help content creators produce more successful live streams, which in turn boosts TikTok's profits. Agencies we spoke to said TikTok pays them a commission according to the duration of the live streams and the value of the gifts they get. They said TikTok takes between 50 and 70% of the profits of live gifts, but they couldn't confirm the exact amount. We asked TikTok, but they wouldn't say. So we decided to test it for ourselves. We asked local journalist Mohammed to go live from an account in Syria and sent him $106, around £90 in gifts from another account. We were the only ones on that live stream to do so. Then Mohammed checked the balance of his account. $33, so it is 70%. They're taking 70%. Next, Mohammed went to the local money transfer where TikTokers cash out their earnings. From our $106, TikTok took $73. That's almost 70%. The money transfer shop charged a further 10%. And people like Hamid, who provide the phones, take a cut of what's left. So from those $106, Mohammed would have just over $19, and often the families we spoke to get much, much less. But in the camps, jobs are scarce, and there are few other options. We showed the videos to a non-profit called Access Now that protects people's rights online.
TikTok is creating and enabling an ecosystem that runs on the exploitation of people's suffering. So this is a clear violation of their own terms of services, not let alone, of course, the rights of those people.
We put these allegations to TikTok, and they sent us a statement saying that this type of content is not allowed on their platform and that they would strengthen their global policies around exploitative begging. As for the 70% cut, TikTok insists they take less than that, but they still won't confirm the exact amount. So we repeated our experiment with accounts in the UK and Syria that weren't signed up to agencies, and found that TikTok took just under 70% every time. We called Keith again to tell him what we'd discovered. We found that 70% of all of the money donated would have gone straight into TikTok's pockets.
Are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. It's very unfair, especially to them families over in Syria. You've got to have some transparency And you know, to me, that it's very greedy. It's greed, isn't it? It's greed.
A charity that works in the camp told us that it could help support these families as an alternative to making money from TikTok lives. Many people on TikTok are calling these live streams scams. But the struggles of the families we met are very, very real. People have donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to them, but the lion's share lines the pockets of TikTok and its agencies. Whilst for these families in Syria, life continues, with no change in sight.
So we're close, guys. God, this is the part where I feel really, really tense. Be like, oh God, I'm coming back to this prison again. Because it was a prison to be like, to be fair, I'm coming back again to this place.
Dr. Augustine is a Nigerian doctor who came to the UK 2 years ago. His recruitment by a British company called NES Healthcare meant working extremely long hours in a private hospital, with potential consequences, he says, for patients' health. Today, he's taken me back to that hospital in the UK that he says almost broke him.
It's my room over there, the 4th floor. Up there? Yeah, you can see the windows open. So there's a doctor up there, and right now I'm doing the same job I was doing. I still feel anxious because, you know, I can't explain what it means like just being confined to this place for 7 days, 24/7. Every day I work in this hospital, I always thought that something could go wrong.
Augustine is one of 9,500 Nigerian doctors licensed to work in the UK. Recruitment from abroad has never been higher, with 40% of doctors trained overseas.
I would wake up at 6:30, be on the ward at 7, and it was an 80-bedded hospital. So I was looking after all of the patients on the ward, outpatient setting, the CT and X-ray, and I'll be working from 7 up until 11.
At night?
Yeah, at night. And I would think that I'm meant to go to bed, you know, just get some rest. But then when you go to bed, you get a call, all patients complain about this, and your sleep is ruined, so I'm not able to sleep again. Up until 7 again, and the cycle continues for 1 week.
But how do some of these doctors get here? Newsnight has been investigating the story for months. We've discovered a scandal about large-scale recruitment and exploitation of foreign doctors in the UK that reaches as high as the British government. Nigeria's economic hub, Lagos, is a mix of oil-driven wealth and life-shortening poverty. Most here don't live beyond 54. Just 5 miles from the centre, Makoko, a floating city where some people have never seen a doctor.
Doctors in Nigeria now, they are traveling to abroad. Because of the salary they are collect every month, it's not reach anywhere. That is why they are traveling to go abroad.
It's a brain drain that's worsening each year. The World Health Organization has stepped in, compiling a list of poor countries with healthcare shortages, from where the rest of the world should never actively recruit doctors. The British government incorporated that list into its own code. They call it the Red List, effectively making Nigeria a no-go area for British medical recruiters. However, here in the city, we found hundreds of young doctors queuing for what's called a Professional and Linguistic Assessments Board test, or PLAB-1, a first step to practice in the UK. And here's the thing, the exam is set by the General Medical Council in London, and the people you see in blue bibs work for the British Council, which is sponsored by the Foreign Office and is overseeing the exam. it was made clear we weren't welcome. We'd just been thrown out of the car park of the examination hall, and it was the British Council who threw us out, and they said, it's just not good to have you here. And they said it's about the candidates' privacy. But I wonder if it's also to do with the fact that they know that Nigeria is on the red list and they just don't want to be associated with the brain drain. 3 hours later, the candidates emerge into the Nigerian sunshine. Where do you want to go if you succeed?
I want to go to the UK.
UK. I want fulfillment in my craft. I want to get to, the NHS has a working system, and that's what I want.
In London, we described what we'd seen to the British Medical Association, the trade union for doctors in the UK. Is the British government complicit, do you think, in active recruitment?
Certainly they will be aware if the British Council is enabling mass-scale taking of the PLAB exam. It would be, I think, misleading for the Department of Health and Social Care to say that they did not know about this. Indeed, they are trying to take some active steps with the Code of Practice to discourage it.
But they know this is a red list country, don't they?
Absolutely.
And yet this is overseen by the British Council, which is funded by the Foreign Office.
Absolutely. So there's an element of one hand giving in the Code of Practice and the other hand taking away.
The Department for Health and Social Care rejects that and says responsibility for arranging PLAB exams lies with the GMC, which is independent of government. Remember Augustine, the doctor from the start of this report? Well, it was whilst he was studying for the second part of those PLAB exams here in the UK that he was approached by NES Healthcare, the company behind me, and later offered visa sponsorship and a potential job. It sounds like that's a breach of the government's Code of Practice on no active recruitment from red list countries. NES says it's not because the company's not a recruitment agency and the doctors it engages with have already committed themselves to working in the UK anyway. But a spokesman for the Department of Health and Social Care told us that the code does apply to NES and so it's in breach of it. Augustine had signed a contract with NES that opted him out of the Working Time Directive. Do you think that you were so tired that there was a potential that you weren't doing the best or weren't delivering the best care for the patients?
Yes. Yes, and that was my worry because I knew that working tired puts the patients at risk and puts myself also at risk as well for litigation and other things. So I was really, really worried.
If he was too tired to work, his contract permitted deductions from his salary. NES says that's to cover the cost of a backup doctor.
I knew it was wrong. I knew it was wrong. I knew everything was wrong. That's why I raised concern. It wasn't right.
Did it act as a disincentive when you knew you were going to lose money? If you were actually doing the right thing and getting a replacement to come in?
Yes.
Then you were being penalised for that?
Yes.
This is who NES doctors often come to for help. Dr. Jenny Vaughan from the Doctors Association. I asked her if these long hours could be excused in any way. At night, for instance, when doctors are only on call, not actually on the ward unless needed.
If you're on duty, and you're in a hospital room, you could be called at any time. That is a basic understanding of a doctor who's on duty. That's why no doctor in the NHS on the NHS contracts does more than 4 nights consecutively, because we know that it's frankly not safe.
She's particularly concerned that NES doctors are not allowed to leave their contracts without 3 months' notice or face more deductions from their salary.
This is a slave-type work with low pay and excess hours, the like of which we thought had been gone 30 years ago. It is not acceptable for patients safety reasons. It is not acceptable for doctors.
Back in Nigeria, more GMC exams are organised for the new year, and Britain will continue to recruit doctors here because it's cheaper than training them at home. It raises an uncomfortable question. How can we be serious about honouring the red list and thereby helping protect some of the poorest nations on earth when our own system can't function without shopping for doctors abroad.